September 4th, 09, a decade ago, almost to the day. I had no idea what a big day it was going to be. I guess you never really do, right? Anyway, I have a question for you.
Have you met Ted?
No. Have you met Chad? Well, you should. Let me tell you a story. I woke up in Las Vegas. No, not like that. I was actually visiting family. I used to live there myself, with them, and I remember thinking as I woke up that I had a really long day ahead of me. I had a surprisingly decent night's sleep on the fold-out chair bed thing, and that was nice. But a few cups of coffee and a really nice breakfast later, I was blasting off on the Northtown 1 departure, happy the turbo stationary I borrowed for the trip climbed so well with just me in it, because it was like 107 degrees. But anyway, before I knew it, I was turning back around towards Las Vegas VOR, joining Victor 538, and on my way back to San Diego. I had to drop off the stationary at French Valley where my car was waiting for me in the hangar, and then I had to jump in my car and make the hour-long drive to Carlsbad, and hopefully grab a bite to eat on the way. Luckily, I didn't hit any traffic. So when I got there, I had just enough time to park and walk out to the ramp, and I saw my friend Kevin's new Cessna 400 on short final. And that was going to be my ride for the rest of the day. And flying it was a guy named Chad. A guy who would end up being one of my favorite aviation friends, and little did I know, somebody with whom I was going to have a lot of adventures in the future. Anyway, he was there to deliver the plane to its new home on the West Coast from Dallas, and he needed to check me out in it so that I could mentor our mutual friend, and of course the owner of the airplane, Kevin, to reach his solo insurance minimums in it. Easy enough. So, after some handshaking and a really thorough pre-flight, we had just one question. Where you want to go? We started naming off all the airports within a 30-minute range, and the list was pretty long, but once the Van Nuys one came up, Chad lit up and he said, landing on 16 right is a bucket list item, and if it was all right, that's where we should go. And I decided right then and there, Chad's my kind of guy. Well, Chad got his wish all right. We actually did 6 touch and goes on good old 16 right, and 10 years later, it's still a favorite flight in my logbook, and his too. And it was also the last time we ever flew together that I had more time in my logbook than he did in his. But let me get right down to the point about this whole thing. This was a serious aircraft checkout for me, and after this and another flight, I was going to be turned loose with the plane, and I had to turn around and mentor someone else in it, a new owner. And this is the stuff that most people don't really picture when they talk about being a CFI. But it made me realize something. For those who really have the heart of a teacher, there's just so much more to being a CFI than teaching people towards certificates and ratings and check rides and things like that. The idea of being a CFI that most people don't picture. And there's a secret out there I don't want you to tell anyone, okay? You ready? It's actually fun. That's right, the people you're going to meet, the places you'll go, the money you can make, and the aviation life you can live. They're probably beyond what most aspiring CFIs could possibly picture as a reality. I mean, the cookie-cutter time-building approach thing works too. Really, it does. I did it myself once upon a time, sort of. But it's basically the norm, and I get it. But after today, you might see things a little differently. And that's why my friend Chad is here. Because he's going to give you the kind of solid, straightforward, honest, and direct discussion that you've come to expect around here. About what? Well, about living a life in aviation that most people don't know exists. You know how aviation has a way of getting under your skin, kind of making you a little obsessy, making it hard to see the... No, don't play that. I don't want to get sued. But sometimes it's just hard to see how much is out there besides the standard career track. And not just as an alternative to 121 flying, but as an entire lifestyle with unlimited freedom and earning potential and that all-important intangible, personal gratification. Because as fun and lucrative as it is for you, you're still always helping others along the way. So today on the show, a 6-part conversation that tells the story of a career in private aviation, but more importantly, it's like 6 small chapters of a larger truth that none of us can believe actually worked out, and how the logbooks we carry around keep our stories safe for the next generation of our business. I think it's time we meet Chad, don't you? Don't go away.
I'm Chad Fortenberry from Garland, Texas. Grew up in Garland. I still live here, and that's not by accident. It just sort of happened that way. Garland's just a suburb of Dallas. I went to Bishop Lynch High School, graduated in '94. I went to East Texas State University. It's now Texas A&M Commerce. I got my bachelor's and my master's degree from there. My bachelor's in '97, master's in '99. Ended up as a restaurant manager at Chili's for 8.5 years. About 5 years into it, I decided to pursue my dream of flying an airplane and get my private pilot's license. And when I did that, a little bit into my private, probably about 20 hours, I said, the heck with this. I'm going to do this as a career. Took me about 2 years to get my ratings, 2.5 to get my CFI, II, and MEI. So about 2.5 total for everything. And I quit my job at Chili's, became a flight instructor. And then from there, just worked my way up in aviation to the position I've got now, and just flying a Challenger 300 and a Citation 10 for a family. I do teach on the side. I've never stopped being a flight instructor. It was something that was true to my heart. I did get my undergrad in education. And as an undergrad major in education, teaching is something that I always had a passion for. And it's always something that I wanted to do. My attitude towards it was that somebody had to sit in the right seat while I learned how to fly. And to return that favor to me was just awesome. And I just kept going with it. And now I teach in all the PA-46 model airplanes, the Malibu, the Meridian, the M500, which is that model, and the M600 model airplane. And I teach in the TBM model airplanes as well, the 700, 850, 900, 930, 950 TBMs. I also get full initials in the Cessna 400 model airplane. That's the single-engine composite aircraft that Columbia developed and that Cessna later purchased. It's no longer in production as of last year, but that's truly a fantastic airplane as well.
I don't think you and I ever really talked about this that much, but back in the day when you were going for education and then you ended up managing at Chili's and all that, what did you think your future was going to be like back when you were getting those degrees versus, where it is now?
Well, I started out, I was working for the Dallas Mavericks as a ball boy, and I got to know our trainer, Doug Atkinson, pretty well, and I really enjoyed his position and what he did. Also, our strength coaches at the time, great guys, and got to know them pretty well too. And when I went into college, majoring in sports medicine and education and going through the athletic training program as a double major and then getting my master's in health, that's the direction I thought I would take career-wise, is being an athletic trainer. Something I didn't pursue after college, and it just so happened I ended up being a restaurant manager for 8.5 years. But it was always my dream as a kid to be a pilot. I'd always dreamed about flying airplanes. I had a whole playroom at my grandmother's house, and the bookshelves were bookshelves, but they were reserved for aircraft. And I had all kinds of model aircraft, from the Caravan with floats to a miniature 727, anything in between. I had a 7.4 model of a freighter. I had an old 707 model of Air Force One. You name it and go on down the list, I had it. And that's my grandmother and I. We used to have maps of the world in the playroom posted on the walls, and we used to pick a destination that we would fly to, and we'd fly those airplanes around as we were flying around the world, and we'd pretend like different rooms in the house were different destinations. And that's what we did that for years. I can't tell you how many, but it was probably a good 6 or 7 years we did that.
How have you never told me this story?
Well, I don't think you've ever asked.
Oh, there we go. Well, good thing I have a podcast now, huh?
Right. There you have it.
All right, so I got to ask you that if after all that, I mean, that sounds like such a wonderful experience to have had. Why at the time would you not have gone straight into a flying career like from that? I mean, why would you think of doing something else? I mean, that seems like after childhood, you would have just gone just straight into it.
I never really thought it would have been a reality for me as a career at the time. I think we all mature in our minds at a different level, and I just don't think my maturity level was there yet. As I went to college to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to get a college degree, and I knew it was going to be in something, and it was just something that was related to what I was doing at the time. Wasn't really related to a true passion that I had as a child. And I just figured that was just a dream. And it wasn't until midway through Chili's that I met a guy. His name was Charlie Cottingham, and he's a very senior captain for Southwest Airlines. And I met him in the gym, and it was about 6 months after meeting him before I was like, well, you're here in the morning every day, and I'm here in the morning every day. You must have an odd kind of a job. What do you do for a living? And he told me, he said, well, he was a first officer at the time for Southwest. I'm an FO for Southwest. Oh man, I love airplanes. And we started talking, and we were working out together. He was asking me stuff about lifting weights. So we just became workout partners. And from there, I told him how much I wanted to fly airplanes, and he said, well, you ought to do it, and you ought to go get your private. So that's when I started to get my private, and just so I could fly around the city and enjoy aviation and just see what that was all about. But it wasn't there, like I said earlier, midway through my private, that I just made the commitment. I just got addicted and said, I'm doing this for a living. That's it. I'm done. We can definitely tie that into the logbook, because Joe Casey is the one that gave me the idea. He said, I log every flight still. And I told Joe, how many flights that I log. I've got 4 copies of my logbook. I've got everything on my original 4 logbooks, my baby blue logbook. And then I've got my 3 big, thick green logbooks. I'm fixing to have to go to a 4th, actually. And then I have everything on Log 10 Pro, and I have everything saved off of Log 10 Pro separately on a PDF. And then I have everything from Log 10 Pro X printed out and in those big law library notebooks, because it's just so thick. So I have 4 copies of everything I've done. And I was talking to Joe, and Joe said, well, yeah, I log every flight. And Joe's got, tons of around the world time. And he said, yep, this is the best storybook in the world. My grandson's going to pick this up one day and think, wow, what a story Grandpa had. He went all over the world, and this is when he was flying, and this is when he flew it. And it just tells a great history of what you did as a pilot, and where you were and what you were flying, and if you shot approaches, and if it was IMC or not. In some cases, who you were with, and the notes in regards to that, when you got your check rides done, when you got different type ratings, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a great history of your time in aviation.
For sure. When was your first flight? Like, do you still have that logged?
Oh, June 30th of 2006 with Ben Klutz and 5359 Kilo, a 172.
There you go. So what are some of the best things you've put in your logbook since then?
Oh, I think one of the best days was the day I got my instrument rating. That's a big rating for anybody to get, I think. We get instrument ratings. We think, oh, we're getting instrument rating. We get flight IMC. But really, an instrument rating it makes you a better pilot is what it does. And it gives you really a license to learn further in our profession of aviation. And when we get an instrument rating, we've got to remember that instrument rating qualifies you in any instrument airplane, 747 all the way down to a 172 or a 152 for that, that matter. So that instrument rating is huge. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been able to put in my logbook. I think another really nice thing to get in that logbook was my very first type rating in a King Air 350. That BE 300 type, although not easy by any standard, it is definitely valuable, and it was definitely important. Number one to me, because it was my first type rating, but also there are so many of those airplanes out there. It is a type rating that can keep you employed for a long time in the professional world of aviation.
I know one of my favorite entries in your logbook. Remember that time we went to Van Nuys and we had to put it down on 16 right?
Oh, I'm telling you, and I'd watch that movie 16 right, and anybody that's involved in aviation ought to watch it that hasn't. It's a really good movie. It tells a lot about the history of that airport, and it shows a lot of passion and a lot of positive things about our world of aviation. 16 right at Van Nuys, that's probably one of the coolest things that we've ever done, in my opinion. is taking that Cessna 400 over there and doing continual touch and goes in the pattern at Van Nuys with those folks. It brings up another ongoing memory that you and I've had. I enjoyed every time we do it, and every airplane we've done it in is going into LAX. I think that's just a lot of fun to go into LAX and park over there at Atlantic, and then go to In-N-Out Burger for lunch and just watch the big heavies come over on that runway out on the AstroTurf deal they've got out there, so you can just relax and hang out and enjoy the good weather in the aircraft.
Yeah, 100%. Now, one of the fun things about going into LAX is that, it's sort of go fast as long as you can, then stop as fast as you can. And I remember doing that in the 400 was pretty fun. I remember when we actually were catching up to the 757 in front of us, and they sidestepped him over to the other one, and we took the left. That was kind of fun.
Oh, absolutely. It's never a dull moment doing anything like that. And one of the good things about going into LAX and doing all that is you've got plenty of runway, no matter what aircraft you're in. So it allows you to keep your speed up in that plane, and do that in the Cessna 400. Although we've been in the Meridian, we've been in the M600, and I think, going in the M600, that's definitely just a little bit more livable because you can do the 160 knots everybody else is doing, and then without having to push anything, and you can get that deal right over the numbers and right on the thousands without any issues with the other airplanes, and that's what makes that airplane special, and that's what makes going into LAX a little bit more livable now that we have the ability to get in that airplane and do that. Here we go. How about somewhere September 4th of 2009? Here's Van Nuys, Long Beach. Here it is right here.
There it is.
There's the 3.0 CRQ, Van Nuys, Long Beach, and then back to CRQ. That was it. That was a nice 3-hour flight that we did that day. It was 9/4 of 2009 was our first flight together. We've been flying for just a little over 10 years now. It's 2019, isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. 10 years. Wow.
And how time flies, I tell you what. Yep. In the last time we flew, we went up to Monterey and back on that trip, but I think the time before that, we ended up in Long Beach in a TBM.
That's right, we did. Back to there 10 years later.
Yeah, matter of fact, and we went to Long Beach, and I believe we ended up in, did we end up in Van Nuys or Burbank on that one?
We went to Hawthorne.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We went to Hawthorne.
Which is probably one of the shortest flights you could ever do, and the fact that we were in a TBM 940 made it all the more fun.
Yeah. And then, we went we went Long Beach to Hawthorne, and then we went Hawthorne, and we did the 1201 on the Santa Monica VOR.
That's right, the LA Special Flight Rules.
Yep, Special Flight Rules. Flew over LAX there, and I thought we went into... I'll pull it up.
We went to Camarillo.
We went to Camarillo.
And we went to the Waypoint.
Right. Yep. Yes, that's right. Camarillo.
Possibly one of the best airport restaurants in the world.
I tell you what, that place is fantastic. If nobody's ever been there that's been out in Southern California flying around, stopping into Camarillo for lunch is a great experience. A wonderful restaurant. They've got really good food and great service there too.
Speaking of TBMs and Meridians and things like that, that's pretty much where we've been lately, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I've been on the receiving end of your training for about 10 years. And so far that's added up to the 400, the Meridian, some TBM stuff. And there's some pretty cool people behind the companies that are doing that. And actually, both of them have been on this show before. The first one is Joe Casey, and he's the guy that's kind of Mr. Meridian in my eyes. So you guys are pretty good friends. Let's talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about Joe Casey. He's one of my very favorite people in aviation. He's got an awesome story. A helicopter pilot in the military, strong background flying Apaches and Blackhawks. comes to back home to Jacksonville, Texas, doesn't really quite know what he wants to do, becomes an American Eagle pilot for a little bit and says, hey, you know what? I've got to spend some time with my family. Starts his own business, and I tell you what, from the time he started that, it's gone gangbusters. And when I met Joe Casey, I needed an initial in a PA 46 500, and I met him through asking Larry Johnson, who works for Cutter Aviation. He sells the PA 46 model aircraft. Actually, he sells them all, but mainly the PA 46s for Cutter Aviation there in Dallas Addison Airport, where I learned to fly. And I was talking to Larry, and he said, "You need to call Joe Casey." And I called Joe on the phone, and Joe and I went out to do the initial in the Meridian, and we both figured out that we both love to flight instruct. And just to make a little bit longer story, just a little shorter, we ended up becoming friends and working together in training in the PA 46s. And he's got so much business in the PA 46 world that the business that he can't handle, or that's local, and not that he can't handle it, but it's just one person only has so much bandwidth, and there's more demand for that. I started teaching as a part of Casey Aviation, and doing initials and in recurrent training and mentor training with Joe Casey, and Joe and I we've been friends ever since. It's been a great relationship. Joe is one of the instructors that you can get in an airplane with. And when you get in an airplane with him, you feel comfortable, and he is going to teach you something. He is going to cater his teaching style definitely to your needs. And that is something that I have felt that I have been able to do as well as a flight instructor in this business, is not necessarily teaching off of a check sheet where you're just checking boxes. And somebody have an awesome systems background, and they may be able to recite those systems to you in 10 minutes, and that's great. And if you can do that, we can move on to other things. And I've been able to do that in my career just like Joe has. And I think that's one of the strong points that both of us hit it off on, and we both believe strongly in aircraft training. And one of the things that he and I both agree on, and we both share, is I think we both have a really strong passion for teaching, and a really strong passion for teaching in aviation. We love it. One of the things that Joe and I both joke about is that we love flying the big airplanes, and don't get me wrong, I do. It's what I do for a living. I love flying the Challenger 300. I love flying the Citation 10, and I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. But as much or more than I enjoy doing that, I really enjoy teaching people how to fly airplanes, teaching people how to use avionics, allowing others to become a better pilot, seeing things that they may not see in the airplane they need to work on. So Joe and I have done that now for, I believe, going on 4.5, coming up on 5 years with his business. And I'm really honored to be a part of it, because he's an extremely accomplished pilot, an extremely accomplished individual. So just a tribute to Casey Aviation out in Jacksonville, Texas, which is a wonderful place if you've never been there. And Joe Casey has really built that deal to quality and integrity. And I think that, one of the things that Joe and I definitely also agree on is that, one of the things in our business that I don't think we think about enough is that every time we fly an airplane, we're not just flying an airplane. We must do what's necessary to protect the integrity of our business and our profession. That is one of the main things that we definitely agree on when we go to train someone. Not only are they getting a recurrent or an initial or mentor training, they're also getting a friends and family test. Would you allow your friends and family to fly with this individual? That answer has got to be yes, number one. And number two, the assessment on the protecting the integrity of our business and being out there doing the right thing is extremely important.
Yeah. Something I'm noticing as we're talking here, and this is, I think, something that you and I have agreed on now for more than a decade, is when we talk about being flight instructors and going out and doing this stuff, it doesn't seem like we're talking about the same thing that a lot of people talk about when they talk about becoming a CFI. Like they think about, oh, I want to be a CFI so I can build my time and go to the airlines, right? So while I understand that that is definitely an important thing to do, and you don't even start learning until you become a CFI, if you ask me. But that business of perhaps working at a flight school, flying 172s and the like, Cherokees and whatnot, getting people their private instrument commercial, and then moving yourself onto a CRJ, that's sort of the typical thing that everybody thinks about when they think, oh, CFI, okay. But what you and I are talking about, we're talking about the same certificate, the same description, the same whatever, but living a very, very different life when it comes to using your certificate that way, aren't we?
Absolutely. I think in one of the things in our industry that we're experiencing right now, and we'll probably talk about this a lot more in a whole lot of different segments, is a little bit of a pilot shortage that's going to become a lot of a pilot shortage. And one of the shortages we have out there are CFIs that have a lot of experience and a lot of time. We've got a lot of CFIs out there that are what we'll call greener pilots, and that's okay because we were all there at one time. But we have a lack of CFIs at the level to teach in things like single engine turboprops, bigger things, complex avionics, glass cockpits that have a lot of time in those different arenas that you can really pick those things apart. One of the things that you do experience in this business is everybody has a different direction they think they want to go in when they start off. Mine again was I thought I'd get a private and go fly around the city, and then I got the bug, right? So become a CFI, do the deal, and here I am. I thought I would go from being a CFI straight to the airlines. That is the exact thing I thought would happen in my career, but I was in a completely different arena very quickly. I was a CFI full time for about 4 to 5 months, and then I started pulling the gear in the King Air in the charter department at the place where I learned to fly. And so I started flying King Airs, the 90, 200, 300, and 350 as a first officer. And things just took off for me in corporate aviation from that point. I flew with plenty of pilots, and I'm still friends with them today that learned to fly where I learned to fly, or were an instructor with where I was flight instructing at Addison Airport. And you can go on down the list. We're talking about FOs for American Airlines now, FOs for Southwest Airlines, captain for Eagle, and just go on down the list of people that in this profession went straight from the CFI ranks to the airlines, and then in the airlines on up. And I took a much different turn as the person that taught me how to fly, Greg Wilson, who now lives up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and he flies a Pilatus NG up there, and they also have a Piper Saratoga as well, and he works for an oil and gas company. And he didn't have aspirations of necessarily going straight to the airlines. He was a flight instructor, taught me how to fly, became an FO in the King Airs that I became an FO in. We flew together. He was my captain. I was a first officer in King Airs, and he went on up to Stillwater and continued his career there. And I stayed here in Dallas and continued my career in corporate aviation.
So how long did you last at the airlines?
3 weeks is the length of time I lasted at the airlines. And I realized that I had a home in corporate aviation. Airlines were not for me, and came back home after 3 weeks and decided I would pursue that a lot harder than I did. And in that, it turned out to be a great deal. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I'm having the time of my life now, flying with a guy named John Beam and it's been such a wonderful experience. Flying with him, he has over double my time and then some. So it's really nice to always get in the airplane with somebody that you know has a ton of experience. And even though people would look at my time and say, well, you've got a lot of experience, I've been a captain. I'm currently a captain. And that's all fine and good, but there's always somebody out there that knows more than you, and there's always somebody out there that you can learn from. And that's one of the great things that I'm enjoying right now, is that I'm working to become a much better Challenger pilot and a much better Citation 10 pilot. And I'm learning from a guy that's got a whole lot more time than I do. And I think that's something that's important in this world, that we don't have enough of right now going on in aviation, is we don't have enough pilots. I'm 44 years old. A guy I fly with is 64 years old, and that's okay. I would rather fly with somebody that has that kind of time and experience than someone that doesn't, or somebody that's equal to my time, because I think that the learning process is a lot more important in aviation, in the continuing education process, than just being satisfied with the fact that, hey, this is the pilot I want to be, and this is the pilot I am, versus wanting to become a better pilot. And I think that that's something that we need to strive for in this business every day, is we need to make ourselves better.
What do you think about I guess the word for it is hustle, that's required to really make it in the private side of aviation? I mean, you go to an airline, sure, there's a lot of stuff that is just the way it is, and that's the way it is, deal with it. But at the same time, you're sort of rewarded with a bunch of security and things that you probably aren't going to experience in the private side of things as much. What do you, I guess, talk to that point a little bit about what kind of person might be better off in the private side of things versus the structured side of things, at least as it pertains to the business structure of it?
Well, we all have different avenues that we enjoy, and different things that we want to do for our careers. Some of us really want things like set schedules. Some of us really don't mind the on-demand call outs that 135 would require if you were to fly 135. And some of us really enjoy the 91 life. I've been lucky enough in my career to about 80 to 90% of my career now has been at the Part 91 level. One of the things that you hear, I think, from the guys at 121 is, well, after a year, I've got union protection. And I've heard a million airline pilots out there to say, well, it'd take a lot to get me fired and all this stuff. And that's all fine and good if that's what you want to do. The joke in corporate aviation where I'm at is that you're only one landing away from losing your job. You just got to make sure all the landings are good, because you don't want to have a bad one. That is not true, but true to a point, in that, yes, your job is always volatile. But if you take those steps necessary and your performance is quality, and you do those things to, like I said earlier, protect the integrity of our business, and don't think of yourself necessarily as a pilot first. I think one of the things we don't talk about in aviation enough is we don't talk about what our real jobs are. In aviation, sure, the fun part is getting in the airplane, firing it up, and going flying. Everybody loves to do that. But I think one of the things that you have to think of yourself as a pilot, but you have to think of yourself first before you think of yourself as a pilot, is you are a risk manager. And if you get into risk management and you truly think about risk management as it relates to aviation, that is what we do as a profession, and that is where we are. I think what you see in the 91 world and in the 135 world versus the 121 world is we do everything. We get coffee, ice, and papers on board. We do all the flight planning. We do all the weight and balance. We double check all the performance ourselves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't necessarily have a team of people each doing a function, and we don't sit down in the cockpit and get a stack of paper handed to us that we may or may not read, by the way, like the guys in 121 do. And they look at it, everything looks good. They put it in the out box. They get everything loaded into the box. They make sure the fuel matches, and they're ready to go. Well, that's all fine and good if that's what you want to do. So you talk to the freight guys that are flying freight. Again, that's a completely different world depending on what kind of freight you're flying. You can, load boxes and do that type of freight flying if you want to. You can get into the larger freight where the boxes are loaded for you, flying for guys like FedEx and UPS and doing the MD-11 thing and flying the Airbuses and all that good stuff that they all have available to them, and the old 7.2s and doing that. If guys want to do that and fly the backside of the clock and enjoy flying freight, that's also a great avenue. It just so happens the avenue that has involved me the most has been in the 91 world. It's an avenue I've been able to enjoy for a multitude of reasons. One of the big things that I've been able to do in Part 91 aviation is teach on the side. And I think it's important because it's been the bread and butter of my career, and it's been something that's kept me really sharp as a pilot, is being able to teach other pilots avionics, transition training, et cetera, again, in all the PA-46 models, TBM, and the Cessna 400.
So what do you think about pilots coming through today? People always talk about it's more about button pushing than stick and rudder. Is that something you've noticed kind of happening, or would you disagree?
Well, I'm going to disagree with it to a large standpoint. It's all fun and games until you have an emergency or something happens, and then you've got to fly the aircraft. And I think people tend to, take the automation in the glass cockpit situation a little too lightly in conversation, and it makes things it comes across a little differently when you say, it's a bunch of button pushing and this and that. Well, all those buttons, create another management opportunity for the pilot. And the more things we have to manage, the more load we take on in the human brain. So in other words, if you get into a little bit more simpler, a little bit older aircraft that's got some round dials in it and an autopilot and a Garmin 430, and you go flying off in that, well, you've got a whole lot less automation to manage. If you get in one of these things that's got a Garmin 5000 unit in it, for example, and you get up there and things start going on, you've got a lot more of the computer to dig down into and to know just to get, either something done. We say it's simple, but you've got to remember, as a professional, when you say something is simple, what did it take to get to that point? And I think we all forget how much knowledge actually has to be in your brain to get that plane moving versus how much knowledge, you didn't have when you were a green pilot. So it's easy to say, yeah, we push a bunch of buttons and we do this with the automation. But I tell you what, that automation can kill you just as fast as it can keep you alive.
Yeah. One of the most recent sort of realistic crashes that I've heard about, and it goes in our line of thinking here, was that really unfortunate depressurization of that TBM that ended up going into the water in Cuba. And on the very last episode, that was a big part of it, the 900 kilo November incident. And one of the guys that is mired in that world of TBM training is our mutual friend, Will Goldberg. And, he was talking about that a lot, like how your reaction to whatever it is needs to be on point, no matter whether it's an automation thing or an airmanship thing, and that you need to have both no matter what. But let's kind of move back into that a little bit. I want to talk about him and what he does in that world, because when I think automation, I start thinking about, when I think of pilots with a lot of automation, a lot of performance, and maybe not a lot of that experience yet that makes it easy, I kind of start thinking about TBMs. And he's the guy that's got to be the go-between between that fear and then the reality of a really competent pilot.
Well, The TBM is like a mini King Air. It's a pretty strong airplane. That 850 cruise out, 295 normal. You can get, I've seen 308 in a normal situation. So you can move through the sky pretty quick in that thing. You can fly pretty high pretty quick. One of the things that we talk about in that incident, or that I do in aviation, is that you had two very accomplished TBM pilots on board. And what you had happen was nobody stuck to their training. If you have a depressurization emergency and you don't need to ask for permission to descend, you just set your altitude pre-select, you roll the thing down into a descent, and you get going. Hopefully before we do any of that, we put our mask on. None of that happened in that incident. Continued flight at 240 or 260, whatever, I forget what altitude they were at, until we just passed out and flew to the other side of Cuba. Unfortunately, that happened. And one of the things that I try to stress when I think and or talk about accidents and incidents in aviation is I try to put them in my back pocket, and I try to learn from each time something has happened that we get knowledge back on, or we get a report back on about. And I think it's very, very important to keep reviewing all the time, even if you're talking about the same incident or the same accident that may have happened, is that getting that knowledge and keeping that knowledge fresh in your mind so you don't repeat history. You can use it it was an extremely unfortunate situation, as they all are. But the thing is that if we learn from those situations, I think we're gonna better protect, again, the integrity of our business, and we're gonna be able to move forward in aviation. William Goldberg, I've recently, just this past year, gotten on board with him, and he's becoming a really good friend. And him and his wife Kristen, they do a tremendous job running their company at Goldberg Aviation. The TBM training that they do is outstanding. I'm very privileged to be on the team of instructors with Goldberg Aviation, and I'm honored to have a position there teaching in the TBMs. A gentleman that I met a long time ago and have flown a Cessna 400 with for years and years has afforded me that opportunity through his purchase of a TBM 850. And William and I just connected, just pretty much like Joe Casey and I did, and we hit it off, and all that good stuff that goes along with aviation. He came out to train me, and when he did, he invited me to come along with him as an instructor. And I can't tell you how William, the funny thing is how William and Joe Casey both have had similar career paths. Joe Casey flew helicopters in the Army, and William flew fixed wing. He flew the RC-12, the King Air 200 version of that's what we call the King Air 200. They call it the RC-12, and he flew the 350 King Air in the Army, and then he flew the Dash 8 in the Army. So he was fixed wing Army, and then Joe was helicopter Army, and they both came out of the Army wanting to pursue a career in the business, and both ended up doing kind of the same thing and then starting their own companies. One PA-46 and Goldberg, the TBM arena. So having both of those arenas and being able to be exposed to that has just been a real privilege in my career, and I've certainly enjoyed it, and I'm certainly humbled because of it.
What do you think it is that ties these groups of people together that not only have had similar backgrounds, but that have come out, started their own businesses, gotten involved in a particular type community, and really, really gone with it then? I mean, what kind of psychology do you think is involved with that?
Well, I think you have two different types of people in this world. Actually, you have several different, but you have people that they're okay just being a line captain. And then you have entrepreneurial style people that want to go out there and create opportunity for themselves, or that see opportunity out there in the world of aviation and see a niche that they can get into. And they just aren't satisfied with a one salary gig, and they see the unlimited earning potential that's out there in the business. And I think they also see a need that exists in a need that's there, either in the TBM world. It could be in any world. It could be in the, we're talking about TBM and PA 46 because we have a connection there, but it could be in any sector of our business, airplane management, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more out there than just being a captain, and there's more avenues that we can explore in this business. And in talking to William, one of the things that he said, and I said, well, how did, he told me how he got started. I gave you an overview of that, et cetera, et cetera. And he says to me, he says, Chad, I love the adventure. I love where this thing takes me. I couldn't go into some of these airfields and some of the parts of the world and work for UPS or FedEx or American Airlines or some of these different places or different airlines that are out there. I'm sorry, and things like that. He says this TBM thing, this takes me all the way up into northern Canada. It's taken me to South Africa, into airports that you wouldn't believe existed, into stretches of pavement that double as highways or roads, and different things like that you would see around the world, that you wouldn't get that kind of experience. And just is coming from that military background, just like Joe Casey does. These guys, at one time or another, you're out on base and you're sitting in the sand in Iraq, or you're out in Afghanistan and you're out on deployment doing X and Y and Z. And you're that's the type of person that you are. You come back and you like outdoors, and you like camping and hiking and fishing and hunting and all that good stuff. And this is kind of the area of aviation that would give you that type of experience in order to go into people's, ranches and go fishing and hunting and go up to Alaska on a salmon, adventure, and go down to, over to South Africa and do a safari at the same time that you're training somebody in a TBM. Those are the type of things that we get to do in this sector of the aviation community that the other sectors of aviation community do not get to experience.
I probably shouldn't be surprised, but I feel like you just described yourself too.
Oh, well, actually, you're exactly right. I really enjoy it and enjoy what we get to do all the time. One of the best things or funnest things that I think we get to do is every time I come to Carlsbad, we get to go tear up Southern California and hit as many airports as we can, and go out there and I mean, we can go to John Wayne, Long Beach, Hawthorne, over to Santa Monica. Hopefully for more. Hopefully that thing stays open a lot longer than we want it to, or than they want it to. But Santa Monica and going in there is awesome. Going over to Van Nuys, up to over to Camarillo, Burbank, all the cool spots that we've been, and the things that you and I have gotten to do as a result of being in this side of the profession are tremendous. And then we get to do it when we want to do it. So we can just get in the airplane at Palomar, figure out what we want to do. We can just start off with one airport in mind and figure out the rest on the fly. And it's just awesome. And all the cool places that we could go, and all the places that we still will go. When I come out there next in October, and you and I are going to go flying in the M600. I mean, we can sit there and go, hey, let's go hit some new airports. And we can go find new places we've never been before, and we can go out there and just go tear it up that way if we want to.
Is there an airport anywhere in the country that you've never been that you've always wanted to go?
Offhand, I think I've hit all the ones that, the biggest one for me, and this is going to sound crazy, was I really enjoy every single time we go into LAX. I think that is just a lot of fun, and that was bucket list for me. LAX, the In-N-Out Burger, and hanging out on the lawn there, and watching the heavies land, and then taxiing out of there, and going home. I think that's one of the very coolest out there. Another bucket list airport for me was Eagle. For a long time, I grew up skiing in Vail, Colorado, and aviation has brought me back there more times than I ever thought it would, based on the fact that I had a job for about 6 years working for the owner of Omni Hotels, and they had a house there in Beaver Creek, and another friend of his had a house in Beaver Creek, and we would go up to Eagle constantly. Love flying in and out of Eagle County Airport, but I cannot say in my mind that there's a place I haven't been that I've wanted to go to, just based on the fact that the teaching in the PA-46s and in the other airplanes that I teach in has given me the opportunity to get all of that knocked out already. One of my favorite things that I didn't touch on in teaching is kicking myself out of the airplane. When you're doing an initial with somebody, or you're teaching them how to fly, I've got an instrument student right now, and I've got a commercial student also. The commercial student's in a Malibu, PA-46 350. My instrument student's in a Cessna 400. And I think one of the biggest pleasures that I have is that, like my instrument student, I taught him how to fly the airplane. I gave him his initial in the 400. I also gave his father initial in the 400, is kicking myself out of the airplane and saying, guys, you are ready to go fly your airplane. Or, sir, you're ready to go fly your airplane. Or, ma'am, congratulations, but, I love showing up to the airport, and I never tell them this. I'll show up to the airport for a lesson, but I'm not going to be on the airplane. And I go, you're ready to go fly your airplane. I'll either be here when you get back, or you can go fly it without me, and I'll just go home. But you have either option up to you, but I'm not getting the airplane with you today because you're ready to go. That is probably one of the most enjoyable things in aviation that I'm able to expose myself to.
So what's next for you then?
I'm not really sure what's next. I love teaching, and I think that's great. Focusing on just being the best Challenger 300 and Citation 10 pilot that I can be. Staying positive, which I'm always positive in this business. I wouldn't know what else to do in life if it wasn't for airplanes. I think I've really found a home in corporate aviation and in teaching in this profession. It's been really great to me. And I think next is just riding the wave as long as it's a wave, and taking care of that wave as much as I can. There's always a saying that we feel like something's going to be forever, but nothing is necessarily forever. So I always say I'll ride the wave as long as it's a wave. And then when the wave's no longer there, I'll paddle back out and get on another wave. But hopefully the waves that I'm on now last for a long time, because I couldn't imagine being on anything else.
I think as Chad talks, I'm just always so happy to realize that I'm talking not only to another teacher, but to a person who takes ownership of our industry to the highest level, particularly when he talks about things like protecting the integrity of our business, and how we always talk about adventure, but it doesn't mean going out and doing things that are stupid. It means having complete ownership over the experience you're making and still loving every second of it. If you want to get in touch with me or Chad, email me, Brandon@podcastingonaplane.com, and I can get it set up for you. This episode of the show, just like every other, is brought to you through the generous support of our patrons on Patreon and individual donors through PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. If you're interested in supporting the show too, go to podcastingonaplane.com, and it's really easy to get started. You can even just swipe up on your phone right now and click on the link in today's show notes. Well, that's all for now. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI, nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.